Hello, welcome to the Bee Vlog. It was suggested by a viewer in one of my previous episodes that I take a moment to talk about my location. So that's what this episode will be all about. I live in Beaverton, Oregon, which is just outside of Portland. We have quite a bit of variety of plants here in Oregon, but a lot of it depends on the location in Oregon and also your altitude of when we get nectar flows and what type of nectar flow. If you live in the eastern part of Oregon, it's more of a desert region, but if you live in the western part, it's wetter and probably a greater variety. Right now, going into April, we're going to be having a maple nectar flow. That should last until about mid-May. We also have quite a bit of fruit trees. Apples are very common here, as well as cherries. In May, we also have, as far as the primary sources of nectar, there's poison oak, snowberry, vine maple, cascara, and hairy vetch. In June, we'll see the blackberries come on. The snowberries continue. The cascara also, and hairy vetch also continue. And then in July, things start to slow down a bit, but the blackberry is still flowing. Other sources of nectar and pollen in the area include dandelion, Oregon grape, raspberry, clover, dill, thistle, cottonwood. Everywhere you go, pretty much, anywhere where there's some wild land or natural land, you'll see a lot of blackberry. We actually have an invasive blackberry that's growing in a lot of these areas. It's great for the bees because it provides a good source of nectar and pollen. And if you're out hiking or biking, a lot of people like to stop on the side of the trail and eat some of the blackberries when they're ripe. But again, it is invasive, it's thorny, and it tends to take over a lot of our wetlands and green space. So there's quite a bit of effort to maintain and restore some of our forests and wetlands and remove this blackberry. We get quite a bit of rain here, and we average about 40 inches of rain a year, but most of that rain tends to fall over a long period of time. It doesn't all come down in great big downpours. It just kind of drizzles for about, it feels like about 8 months of the year, although most of the rain does fall in November, December, and January. The wetlands act as a good sponge to help soak up that rain, and it's an important element to our watershed. It's also a great source for the natural plants and animals, the native species that live here, which are important to our environment. Our driest months would be July and August. The temperature here is pretty moderate. In the summer it doesn't get too hot. In July it's the hottest month and it averages about 81 degrees. Although we have a record of 106 degrees, so it can get hot sometimes, although it doesn't happen much. December is our coldest month, the average temperature being 34 degrees, and what's interesting, I tried to find what the record minimum temperature was in December and I couldn't, there just doesn't seem to be a record of that. But in November, the record was 9 degrees. So looking at this chart, you can see that we don't start to see 70-degree temperatures until around the end of May or June. And this can be troublesome to those beekeepers that are trying to raise queens, because I've been told that queens don't fly to mate until the temperature exceeds 70 degrees. So if you're going to be doing splits, as I plan to do this year, I hope to split my hive, or if you want to raise queens to sell or for your other hives, you have to try to predict about 21 days in advance when the weather will be reaching 70 degrees. And that can be hard. In the spring here we have a huge spread of temperatures. In the mornings it can be 28 degrees and in the afternoons it can be 54 degrees. One day and then 3 days later you won't see a high of 42 degrees. So it can really be very temperamental. Also in fall. Summer and winter tend to be a little bit more stable. So that's my location, or as I often hear the term, locality. The way you raise your bees will very much depend on your locality and the methods that you use and the timing that you have to follow as far as when to do what to your bees while managing. The weather plays an important factor in your area, as well as the available forage. I'm fortunate that in my area there's quite a bit of green space. This B-roll footage that I've been showing you is actually shot all within a quarter-mile radius of my home. My home not being where my bees are, I'm actually in an outyard about 2 miles away. This is my in-laws' home. But it's very typical of what you see in the area. Everywhere you drive, you see a lot of wetlands, forested green space, right next to the housing. In fact, just to my left, to the south, there's a very large forest. Over the houses in the back, there's some more green space and wetlands. They like to fly right over the houses there, I see. So there's a good source of forage for them over there. Just to the west of me, behind the camera, there's a lot of agricultural area. So there's quite a bit of variety and a lot of forage available to them. Now this may not be the case for you in your area. Depending on where you live, you may not have a lot of variety or sources. So try to keep that in mind as you manage your bees. That's one thing that I've been learning as I have been developing my hobby in beekeeping is learning more about the weather and the forage in the area and the timing of when the nectar comes on and when the bloom happens, when the pollen's available. Something you don't really pay attention to in everyday life. I've lived in this area for almost 8 years now, and I haven't really paid much attention to the weather other than whether it's rainy or cold, do I need a jacket? But now that I have a hobby that is very much dependent on the weather, I am starting to pay more attention to that. And as I drive around, I'm looking more at especially the blackberries, but the other plants to see if there's flowers or if it might be a good source of forage for my bees. Try to find out and identify what kind of plant it is. So that's something that I hadn't thought of when I got into this hobby, how much it might impact my understanding or interest in other facets that are directly related to beekeeping, but I didn't think that would be something that would come up.